let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome to the intersection of faith and the culture. You found your way to WallBuilders Live, where we talk about all the hot topics of the day, but from a biblical, historical, and constitutional perspective. You can learn more about us at wallbuilderslive.com. My name is Rick Green. I'm a former Texas legislator and America's Constitution coach, and I'm here with David Barton. He's America's premier historian, our founder here at WallBuilders, and Tim Barton is a national speaker and pastor and president of WallBuilders. And guys, it's Good News Friday, so I'm looking forward to getting some good news from you. But first, let's point out there's lots of good news at the website, wallbuilderslive.com. Jump into that archive section. Tons of great programming over the last few weeks and months. And also, while on the website at wallbuilderslive.com, great day to make a donation. Great time to come alongside us, lock shields with us, be a partner with us, and help us amplify this voice of truth and get it in the hands of as many people as possible. We're really blessed to have donors from all over the country and, frankly, some from outside of America that donate and say, hey, we want more truth in the culture. And anybody can be a part of that. It's real easy. Lives, fortunes, and sacred honor. So fortunes, yep, we're not asking for all of it. But if everybody will give a little bit, we can reach a lot of people with this program.
Yeah, and Rick, it's a really great point that when we look back to the founding of the nation, and we often talk about lives, fortunes, and sacred honors, we don't often realize how much the founders paid to get to the place where they were. You know, we think of cancel culture today and some of the opposition today and the political differences today and the frustrations and, you know, even when we can look and see some of these cities after there's maybe been a shooting, which of course is horrific when people's lives are lost or people's lives are taken from them. And then there's rioting and destruction of property. And there's so much of a really political, but even spiritual conflict happening in America. And if we look back to the founding era, a lot of the battles we're going through are similar in many respects to things they went through, that they had to face the reality that if they stood up for what they believed, they might be canceled. There was going to be opposition. And so they said, look, we're going to put it all on the line. This is the hill we're going to die on. And so often, even inside of Christianity, we want to so much live at peace with other people that we don't often think about there comes a point when, and we know this in relationships, right? For us on the show, we're all married, and we know that there's a lot of battles that are not worth having with your spouse, that are not worth having with your kids, but there are some battles that are worth fighting. There are some places you say, this is the hill I'm going to die on. And for the founding fathers, that's literally what they did. They said, look, this is important enough to us, to future generations. This is the hill we are willing to die on. And I feel like we are at a very similar place in our nation today, that there's a lot of cultural battles, a lot of spiritual battles that are happening. And for many of these battles, these are hills that probably are worth us dying on in many regards when it comes to protecting gender or protecting the next generation. And we can go down the list of things that are under attack in our nation, protecting the fact that females are an actual thing, right? That male and female do exist. And we need to be protecting and defending the fact that females are an actual thing. It's a biological truth. There are certain hills that are worth dying on. And in the midst of thinking about the founding fathers giving their life, their fortune, their sacred honor, these are things that for many listeners, they want to be more active. They want to be more involved. And one way, Rick, you already mentioned, that people can become more active and involved is supporting the voices who are out there promoting the truth of what the Word of God says, the truth of American history, of the U.S. Constitution. These are things that we are promoting. And so people can come alongside and partner to help get this truth out to more people. This is part of how we can be a part of the lives, fortunes, and sacred honors, where the founding father said, this is the hill that we're going to die on. That's really a place we are in America today. There's some things that are worth defending, and this is a hill worth dying on in many cases.
And unlike them, some in many cases had to give everything. We can give a little bit of our time, a little bit of our money, a little bit of that willingness to speak truth to a culture that sometimes doesn't want to hear it. But everybody can play a part. And our part today is to share some good news with the folks at home as well. You guys have been collecting these good news stories over the last few weeks and months. So let's get one quick one in before the break. David, you got our first piece of good news?
I do, and it relates to something that just happened with the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court again has ruled in favor of religious liberties against the attacks of governors and mayors and others that are trying to shut it down. And clearly, one of the lead states in the nation attacking religious liberty has been California, and very onerous, oppressive orders they've had. And it's interesting that when you look at what's happening with the church in America, we've seen a lot of things happening just in the last 2 to 3 years. We're starting to see a lot more courage with a lot of pastors. I was just in Washington, D.C. this couple days ago with a number of courageous pastors who said, look, this is the time we have to stand up. It's time for the church to be seen and heard. We've coasted for too long. We've taken too many things for granted. It's got to change. And so there's a change going in the thinking of the church, but at the same time, there was a change that started a few years ago in the culture of the church, in the sense that when you have these big mega churches, and we've got about 2,500 mega churches across the country now. With the mega church, man, if you got a church of 70,000 people or whatever it is, I don't really have to do anything because somebody's going to do it if there's 70,000. But if I'm part of a church with 23 people, I need to do some things because I can't rely on everybody else to do it. So what we saw starting, 5, 7, 8 years ago was a real trend in home churches, a growth in the movement of home churches, where they're saying, look, this is the way it was in the book of Acts. In the book of Acts, they met from home to home, and it was fellowships of believers that got together in community after community, and that was really the growth of the early church. It wasn't, they didn't have big church buildings in the book of Acts. They didn't have all the stuff that we've gotten into, and they said, we think it's more biblical to have a home church. And so California is one of those places that has a bunch of home churches. And the governor's saying, well, we're going to limit what you do at home and how many people you can have in your house and what you can use your house for during COVID. And wasn't putting that same kind of restrictions on a lot of the businesses, but it was on homes. And so these home churches sued and said, no, you can't do that. You're telling us we can have less people at our home than what we can have in businesses and other places. And you're singling out religion and telling us how many people can meet in a home church, and that's just not right. And so the U.S. Supreme Court came down with a decision and said, that's exactly right. You don't have the right to regulate home churches or churches, period. And so, I don't know, is this maybe 3 times already the Supreme Court has ruled in California? Maybe this is the 4th time the Supreme Court in the last 6 months has had a California-specific ruling, but it affects the whole nation clearly. I mean, this is for all the country. And so for the governors that are still pretty onerous, and I saw a listing the other day of the states that have opened up and the states that are still the most closed down. And not surprisingly, the states that have opened up are all red, and the states that are most closed down are all blue. So there is a political, philosophical difference in the way they see churches and the way they see freedom. But nonetheless, big win from the U.S. Supreme Court. And in that win at the Supreme Court, it was a 5-4 decision, and the 5 that voted for religious liberty, they really took on the Ninth Circuit out there, because this was a case that had gone through the Ninth Circuit, and the Ninth Circuit just kind of let it go and let it ride and didn't stand up for constitutional freedoms. And so the Supreme Court really spanked them pretty good verbally in this decision taken on the Ninth Circuit, which, hopefully that'll make a difference in the way they rule going out. We'll see. But nonetheless, this is a big decision coming down from the Supreme Court, and it does have national ramifications, and it's really good that once again the court recognizes there is the Constitution. It does guarantee the free exercise of religion and the right of assembly, and they upheld that right in California, where that right is definitely under attack.
Good news out of the Supreme Court to start our Good News Friday. Quick break. We'll be right back with more good news. You're listening to WallBuilders Live.
This is Tim Barton from WallBuilders with another moment from American history. The year after the American War for Independence ended, we began addressing the issue of Muslim terrorists in North Africa who were attacking American ships and killing and enslaving American seamen. Congress dispatched John Adams and Thomas Jefferson to negotiate peace, and when they asked the Muslim ambassador the reason for the unprovoked attacks, he told them that it was written in their Quran, that it was their right and duty to make war upon them whenever they could be found. 16 years of negotiations failed, and in 1801, America sent its military to crush the terrorists. When that war ended in 1805, the first American edition of the Quran was published, urging Americans to read the Quran to see for themselves that its teachings were incompatible with the safety and peace of non-Muslims. To see the first American Quran and to get more information about America's first war on Islamic terror, go to wallbuilders.com.
We're back on WallBuilders Live. Thanks for staying with us this Good News Friday. Tim Barton's got our next piece of good news. Tim, let's dive in.
All right, guys, this is something that, in spite of the woke culture happening inside of sports right now, just in the last couple of weeks, there was a significant sporting event known as the NCAA tournament, March Madness. It's something that especially before sports got very woke. This was one of the most watched things in all of America because when you see these college students playing with so much passion and energy for their school, it's just some of the most fun basketball that you're going to see all year long. So this is incredibly viewed, and people do the bracket challenges to try to guess what team's going to win. Well, for those who paid attention, the Baylor Bears with Coach Scott Drew won the first national championship for Baylor. They haven't even been in the Final Four since 1950. And so bringing this championship in, and who knows how many years, and I'm sure somebody knows the years. I haven't done all the research to look through all the years of what Baylor's past history has been. But what was really cool and stood out to me is something this article highlights, which is part of why I pulled this article out for Good News Friday. The title is Culture of Jesus, Others Yourself Leads Baylor Winning First Men's National Championship. Now, for anybody that really paid attention to the tournament, Baylor and Gonzaga were the two top teams that really people thought they're going to go really far. Gonzaga was undefeated going into the national championship game. They had 31 wins and 0 losses. They were a very good team, very well coached. They really, until the Final Four, really, they looked very dominant in almost every game they played. With that being said, Baylor jumps out to an early lead. Baylor looks remarkable pretty much the entire game. Gonzaga has a run or two to try to get back in it, but Baylor is way out ahead. So Baylor finally ends up winning this championship. It's a big celebration. And the news media doesn't always do a good job. Some of these stations carrying sports, they don't always do a good job of highlighting what all the team does after the game, especially when a team like Baylor, as soon as the game's over, they all met at center court and they all knelt down to pray together.
Now, wait a minute. Can you give any other examples where the media hasn't covered that?
Only a couple dozen in the last decade. Yes, right? Yes. If it seems like it's religious, a lot of times these different outlets will cut away from that programming because they don't want to promote religion, so to speak.
Which is the weird thing too, because it happens so often, but we're not aware it happens because they do cut away at such a regular basis. And then you get reports like you're covering here, and it's like people who watch the game didn't have any clue of what happened.
So yeah, normally or many occasions at least, it is somebody who had a phone going and it ends up being a viral video on whatever social media outlet there is. Somebody reports on it and they have a video, but it's not always covered by some of the major stations that carry these sporting events. With that being said, one of the cool things at the end of the game is Jim Nantz, who is the kind of commentator for CBS, was interviewing Scott Drew, and he asked about the team's success. And Scott Drew said, first of all and foremost, I want to thank God for blessing us with the opportunity tonight. I know the guys worked really hard. So happy to get a chance to celebrate now. And he continued, he said, a lot of joy in the locker room for sure, but our joy is Jesus, others, yourself, which for those paying attention, right, the beginning of Jesus, others, yourself, that spells joy. He says, it's so tough to put other people in front of you, and teams that do that are obviously more successful. Our guys, their love for each other is because they spend so much time working on their craft together, and then they put in that time. Well, as the interviews go on, the most outstanding player for the tournament was a junior guard from Baylor. His last name was Butler, and Jared Butler is his name. But when Butler is interviewed, and he's asked kind of about what's going on and being the most outstanding player. Now on his list of achievements, he's a national championship winner. And here's his response as he's being interviewed. He says, man, I'm not trying to preach a prosperity gospel, but our Lord and Savior, I say it all the time, he gets us through everything. Jesus Christ, man, he's the truth. He was with us tonight. He was with us all season. He's with us wherever we go. He just sustained us. He brought us together. He brought this team together, transfers, people from overseas. It's just tremendous how it just comes, and it comes all full circle. Now, the reason I point this out is because it's really cool when you have the national championship team, when the coach comes out and says, okay, here's our focus this year, Jesus, others, yourself, where you are third on that totem pole. This is a really awesome thing. This is a national championship coach on national news saying that we put Jesus first, we put others first, and then we focus on ourselves after those two things happen. Then you have your most outstanding player, nationally recognized, coming out talking about Jesus. Well, in the midst of this, one of the cool things that happened is Scott Drew went through many interviews, and during one of these interviews, he was asked about how he decided to come to Baylor, because he was hired at Baylor back in 2003, And Baylor was a terrible program when he came to take Baylor over. They had all kinds of
They essentially were the death penalty. What had happened
They had
in Baylor.
lots of disciplinary issues from a lot of bad behavior from guys in the team. And so Scott Drew was asked, why would you come to a program this bad when you came back in 2003? He said, were you skeptical about taking the job? And here was Scott Drew's answer. He said, no, I prayed about it, and I felt led to come here. I really believed the vision of the school, the president, the administration during that time, and when they wanted Baylor to continue to grow and become, and I supported that. And the fact that you have a coach at this level saying he was praying and asking about where God wanted him to go, and then he goes because he supports the vision, and his vision is Jesus, others, yourself. Guys, this is so cool that not only do you have a collegiate sport team at this level that is prioritizing the right things, that they got national attention and in front of national media were able to highlight those things. That's a really cool story and a fun piece of good news.
At a time when, sometimes we feel like, the culture's just lost and it's all negative and everything's falling apart, and then you get this bright spot. It's just really, really good news to see the testimony that was given there and, see that the good guys do win, right? I mean, we're always hearing good guys finish last and all that stuff. This is just a great, great story to tell the exact opposite. Really good news for us today. Quick break, guys. We'll be right back. We'll get more good news in a moment. Stay with us, folks. You're listening to WallBuilders Live. Have you noticed the vacuum of leadership in America? We're looking around for leaders of principle to step up, and too often, no one is there. God is raising up a generation of young leaders with a passion for impacting the world around them. They're crying out for the mentorship and leadership training they need. Patriot Academy was created to meet that need. Patriot Academy graduates now serve in state capitals around America, in the halls of Congress, in business, in the film industry, in the pulpit, and every area of the culture. They're leading effectively and impacting the world around them. Patriot Academy is now expanding across the nation, and now's your chance to experience this life-changing week that trains champions to change the world. Visit patriotacademy.com for dates and locations. Our core program is still for young leaders 16 to 25 years old, but we also now have a citizen track for adults. So visit the website today to learn more. Help us fill the void of leadership in America. Join us in training champions to change the world at patriotacademy.com. We're back on WallBuilders Live. Thanks for staying with us on Good News Friday. Next piece of good news coming from David Barton.
On the first day of Christmas,
and only David Barton would choose Christmas music in April.
On the second day of Christmas,
wait. What's wrong with Christmas in April?
No, it's totally appropriate when it's 70-something degrees outside. It's great. There's nothing wrong with this.
Thank you.
70. How about 90?
My point, it's irrelevant what the weather is. It's great. And so obviously there is good news about
the
some
partridge
Christmas.
in the tree died from the heat. I sound like a Scrooge, don't I? I do, yeah.
Well, that comes out every time I do a Christmas thing. So there's nothing new about that, Rick. So the good news is that even though it is this time of the year, court has upheld that in Fulton County, Indiana, they get to keep the nativity scene that they've had. They've been doing this for decades and decades and decades. And so finally the court just got tired of waiting on the case because the case was filed by a guy who does not live in the state and hasn't probably even personally seen the nativity scene. But he talked about how unconstitutional it was. And so the court said, so how has it affected you? How has this negatively impacted your life? Where did you see it? And he can't answer any of that because he hadn't been there. And so the court essentially said, look, this has been going on for 2 years. You're not even from in-state. You don't even live here. We're not going to let you just complain about something and stop it because you don't like it. So the federal courts actually upheld the display of the nativity scene, which is really, really good news for Indiana, and hence the Christmas music. So we kind of get this type of news all year long when it comes to the legal side. But that leads to something else. And there was a study done recently about the U.S. Supreme Court and where they are on religious liberties. This was published in what's called the Supreme Court Review, which is a periodical that looks at what's going on at the court and court issues. And they looked at how the courts have dealt with religious liberty since back in the day of Chief Justice Earl Warren. And Earl Warren, back in the day, he's the guy that said, we're doing things different. Religion's got to go. That's when we saw voluntary prayer taken out of schools, voluntary Bible reading. I mean, that started the whole thing back in 62, 63. And so they went through and said, all right, we've had Chief Justice Earl Warren. We've had Chief Justice Warren Burger, Chief Justice William Rehnquist, and now we have Chief Justice John Roberts. And so they looked at all the religious liberty cases that came up in the tenure of those Chief Justices and found that under Chief Justice Earl Warren, only 46% of religious liberty cases were won. So it should have been 100% because the Constitution's really clear on this. But again, you had Earl Warren who ignored that. So 46% of the time in his tenure, religious liberty won. With Chief Justice Warren Burger, and that's the 60s, 70s, and 80s, it was up to 51%. And then under Chief Justice Rehnquist, who was placed Chief Justice by President Reagan, and he was there until 2005 when he passed away, it was up to 58% of wins. And now under Chief Justice John Roberts, it is actually up to 81% of religious liberty cases are won at the court. So that's the highest it's been, coming up on the better part of a century, which is really good to see that happen. And that's, you can point to justices like Clarence Thomas and justices like Samuel Alito, and you had justices like Scalia. You've got justices like Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and even Roberts. And so now with Amy Coney Barrett, it should even go higher. So good news is that we're winning more religious liberty cases currently under the John Roberts Supreme Court than we've won since back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Very good news. You're on a roll today, David, from the courts. Lots of good news from the courts today. Let's take a quick break. We got time for one more segment of good news. Stay with us, folks. You're listening to WallBuilders Live.
Hey guys, we want to let you know about a new resource we have at WallBuilders called The American Story. For so many years, people have asked us to do a history book to help tell more of the story that's just not known or not told today, and we would say very providentially in the midst of all of the new attacks coming out against America, whether it be from things like the 1619 Project that say America is evil and everything in America was built off slavery, which is certainly not true, or things like even the Black Lives Matter movement, the organization itself, not the statement Black Lives Matter, but the organization that says we're against everything that America was built on, and this is part of the Marxist ideology. There's so many things attacking America. Well, is America worth defending? What is a true story of America? We actually have written and told that story, starting with Christopher Columbus, going roughly through Abraham Lincoln. We tell the story of America not as the story of a perfect nation or a perfect people, but the story of how God used these imperfect people and did great things through this nation. It's a story you want to check out. WallBuilders.com, The American Story.
Welcome back to WallBuilders Live, final segment of good news today, and Tim Barton gets to wrap it up for us. What's our last piece of good news, Tim?
Guys, this one's from Iowa, and it's dealing with a Second Amendment. The governor of Iowa, Kim Reynolds, signed a piece of law that allows residents to buy and carry guns without permits. Now, on its face value, there are people that get nervous when you say that pretty much anybody can own a gun. There are some restrictions in this law, which we will get to, but this is something that even as we look back to the Founding Fathers' intent, their idea was that everybody who was a peaceable citizen should be trained and own a firearm. Now, that's actually kind of an important sequence because they weren't in favor of arming everybody who didn't know how to use a dangerous weapon. This was something that most people growing up were being trained and taught on some level how to use weapons. And it's something that, guys, we've advocated for years, if not decades. And Rick, I know that you and your family started taking groups out to Front Sight to help do training for people to know how to responsibly use and carry firearms. Our family's gone with you guys many times. We love those Front Sight trips because even though we support really all states going to do what would be considered a constitutional carry, we would more so even encourage that before everybody starts carrying their gun, they get trained and know how to use that gun.
Yeah, that's right, Tim. I mean, we go about once a month, so all of our WallBuilders Live listeners, we'd love for you to join us. Check it out at constitutioncoach.com. It's a great time of intellectual ammunition and training on the Constitution, but then, of course, really learning how to properly and safely and effectively carry that firearms. You're right, Tim. It's not enough just to buy the gun. We need to be responsible and get trained on how to use it effectively.
Well, and with all this being said, so we definitely support people being trained and then getting a firearm so you can defend your family, your property, all those things. Great. So in Iowa, part of the law, it does say that you still have to follow federal laws, which, right, novel concept. We're not saying that now you can arbitrarily take your gun and just start firing it at will randomly where you want to. No, follow federal laws. You still have to go through a background check if you're purchasing from a store, wherever the case might be. And in the midst of this, it also has part of the law. It says it will become a felony if a person sells, rents, or loans a firearm to someone that the seller knows or reasonably should know isn't legally allowed to get a gun or is intoxicated. So if you're loaning your gun to a drunk buddy, yeah, you're going to be in trouble for that. So there are still some parameters around the law. But one of the things that the governor said in this is it takes greater steps to inform law enforcement about individuals' mental illness. And she said, we will never be able to outlaw or prevent every single bad actor from getting a gun. But what we can do is ensure law-abiding citizens have full access to their constitutional rights. And this is one of the fundamental points that we make so often, is that you can't make sure bad guys don't have guns. People that don't follow laws aren't going to follow even the news laws you put in place. What we can do is make sure that all of the good guys, all of the law-abiding citizens do have guns, are trained, and know how to defend themselves in those situations, which, Rick, as you mentioned, is why Front Sight becomes so important. But this is a piece of good news that in Iowa, in the midst of some of these gun debates and Second Amendment debates and executive orders coming out from the president, in Iowa, they said, we're going to protect our citizens. We're going to make sure that they have the right to carry firearms with them. So that is good news.
Good news. A lot of good news today. Out of time for more good news, but we'll definitely have some next week for you. And there's more at our website, wallbuilderslive.com. And don't forget, as we talked about at the beginning of the program, that's a great place to go and make that one-time or monthly contribution. Thank you for all your support from all of you across the country. And be sure and share the program as well. It's one of the great ways to be a force multiplier. Get this good news and this information in the hands of as many people as possible. And, of course, make that contribution. And that allows us to add stations, train more pastors, train more legislators, young people, all of those things, and you get to be a part of it. Check it out today at wallbuilderslive.com. We appreciate you listening to WallBuilders Live.
We stand undivided forever.